Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, the new right to repair law in New York will start being enforced on December 28th. The right to repair law gives you the freedom to take your device where you want to get it repaired. The deputy tech editor for Consumer Reports tells you all you need to know. Then, the independent nonprofit and feminist publication, The Conversationalist, aims to foster global perspectives and support journalists from different backgrounds. We were joined by the executive director of The Conversationalist to speak about what it is like navigating the corporate world as a female executive. After that, we take a look back at an interview with the CEO of WSCAH to discuss how the plummeting of SNAP and HRA processing times are affecting organizations trying to support New York City families. And finally, As I Eat the World is about a Latin man who goes on a journey as to what brought him to a breaking point that may or may not destroy him. Exploring many themes such as forced masculinity, the playwright and performer of As I Eat the World joins us in studio to explain the creative process behind this play. So stay tuned, all this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne and today is Tuesday, December 12th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Before we dive into our program, BronxNet is thrilled to mark 30 years of positive impact in the Bronx. Our latest venture, the BronxNet Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx, represents our most significant step yet in bridging the digital gap. However, we can't do it alone. We need your support. Your contribution ensures access to cutting-edge studios, top-quality equipment, and professional development opportunities for individuals of all ages in the Bronx. Join us in shaping a brighter future in technology and media. Let's work together to make the Bronx a better place for everyone. Donate today at bronxnet.org/donate and let's create a lasting impact together. New York has recently passed the right to repair law that allows consumers to take their electronic devices to any repair shop of their choice. Previously, consumers had to rely on major outlets such as Apple or Best Buy for repairs. Chris Raymond, the deputy tech editor for Consumer Reports, joins me to discuss the benefits of this new law. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Kibin. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I talked about it a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about the right to repair law?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, it really gives you the freedom to decide where you want to take your phone or your laptop to get repaired. So, you don't have to go directly to Apple, for example, or to an authorized repair shop. You can go to the mom and pop store around the corner if there's somebody there that you trust. You can go to a place that will repair it as quickly as possible, and you can go to a place that will repair it at a price that you like, rather than having to pay a premium for it at an authorized dealer.
Now, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how it was previously. As I mentioned, you had to go to Apple, or as you mentioned, an authorized, institution. Can you talk a little bit about what they mean by authorized, and what was that experience like for people who owned maybe a laptop or any phones that needed repairs?
Right. So that means that it was a, excuse me, an authorized dealer would have a sort of a partnership with the manufacturer, and they would have full access to the parts that you need to repair devices. They would have full access to the tools that you need. Oftentimes, they're specialized tools you need to open a phone, say, or a laptop. And more importantly, they would have access to the repair manuals, so they would know exactly what needed to be done to repair the device. What this does is tells people that it tells manufacturers basically that they have to provide those parts, those tools, and those manuals to everybody.
Now, last year, Governor Kathy Hochul signed the Digital Fair Repair Act. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So that law goes into effect on December 28th. And basically, all it says is that if you are a manufacturer who sells your products in the state of New York, you have to provide those tools, those parts, and those manuals to everybody in the state, anybody who requests them. And that opens the door for shops all across the state to enter the business of repairing your devices.
Now, I know that they sound very similar. How's the impact? How has it impacted the creation of the right to repair law? Is it necessarily the same thing? Could you expand on that? Because I know there's two different names for them.
Yeah, it's part of the like right to repair movement here in the country, and so people advocates, including advocates from consumer reports, have been pushing for a long time for legislation like this, and it really it varies from just electronic products, but also appliances and farming equipment. So it's quite broad, actually, the rights they're looking for. But this law is the first on the books from a state. And as I said, it's this one is primarily confined to electronic goods sold in stores. So we're talking about phones and laptops, tablets, that sort of thing.
Now, since you mentioned, the products that are covered, can you talk about, maybe what devices aren't covered and why?
Sure. So large appliances like refrigerators, excuse me, and dishwashers are not covered. Medical devices are not covered, and that the farm equipment is not covered at this point. And I think it's just a matter of, this is the first law on the books, as I said, and so this is a start. I think the hope is that we get to include those devices, but right now we were only able to kind of get the law passed for electronic products that are sold in retail stores.
Now, as you mentioned, this is the first of its kind, and I'm curious to know, as I'm, having this discussion, what kind of sparked the movement to kind of have this available? Was there something that possibly happened prior? What inspired people to say like this is something that should be out for the average consumer?
Right. I think some of those places that I talked about, I think there were farmers who were interested in this right off the bat because tractors and things that they used to be able to repair have now become so technologically advanced that the manufacturers sort of insisted on doing the repairs themselves. You had the same thing happen, for example, with iPhones, right? So Apple wants you to kind of bring those phones to the Apple Store to get repaired. Then they did develop partnerships with, say, the Geek Squad at Best Buy, and what you get is premium parts, right? They end up being officially approved by Apple and the tools, like I said, but with those also come premium prices. And I think people, consumers in particular, were tired of saying, look, I paid in full for this device, so I should get to decide where that device gets repaired and at what price I could get. I should be able to go out and get the best price for that. And we have research that suggests that families in New York will save up to $330 a year on average because of this law.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because as you talked about how expensive it could be. I could imagine this is just one of the many benefits to consumers. What are some other ways this will benefit consumers, as we kind of step into a future where the right to repair law is something that exists?
Right. I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I mean, the choice price is one big part of it. So you do get the chance to kind of save that $330 a year, which is no small thing for a family in New York. But you also get to decide then, do you want to take this? I mean, do you have to drive this across town, right, to an authorized dealership or find the Apple store that's nearest you? Do you have to wait a week till they can actually schedule the repair for you? Or can you find a place that will do it for you in 24 hours, right? So you have your phone back or your laptop back. These are like crucial tools for anybody that kind of works in this country. So um, you get the chance to kind of go out and find a place that will do it, the service fast for you. You get to work with somebody that you know and trust, somebody that's in your local community. And like I said, you get to save money.
And you talked about local community. How is this also going to benefit, some very small businesses?
I think that's going to be the big thing. I mean, like honestly, it's very difficult to kind of repair your own phone. So it's sort of presented as like now you have the tools and the access to it, but it's very difficult to open up a phone. You need, um, you know, there's very tiny screws that are in there. They end up being like glued together. So if you're replacing the screen on a phone, it's a very delicate process to take the phone apart. And so this will make the tools that Apple has tools that make it much simpler to kind of take the phone apart and guarantee that you're not going to like mess with the wiring that's underneath. So you're not going to break the phone by doing that. And those tools will now be available to any shop in America. or I'm sorry, any shop in New York City, or New York, I should say, the state of
Right.
New York.
But
Um,
since you mentioned that, I kind of want to
yep.
talk about, possibly the future of this. Right now, it's just in New York, but people are hoping that it does, go across the country. Can you talk about, maybe what are some plans to do in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. So there are 30, excuse me again. Sorry, there are 30 states that have now uh, created some form of legislation, not all of it passed. States like California and Minnesota have already passed laws that have not gone into effect yet. So this law in New York is the first one to go into effect. But you can expect that, once it goes into effect, even if those other laws are not adopted quickly, for a manufacturer, once you start providing the tools and the parts in New York City, it really doesn't make sense to kind of withhold them from the rest of the country. So I think people will start to benefit before those laws go into effect. And even bigger than that, those repair manuals that explain how to do it, the easiest way to distribute those is online.
Right.
And so it's very likely that will become available nationwide, on December 28th.
Right. And I can imagine it's also much safer because prior to this, I know people were kind of doing their own like makeshift way to like fix phones and stuff online. And I could imagine this is just only going to make people a little bit more secure when they do try to do it themselves. Now, I want to talk about how it took several years to allow consumers to have access to this information so they could do this. Could you just talk about some of the challenges to get to the point to where we are right now?
Sure. I mean, it took an awful lot of lobbying, as you can imagine, a lot of sort of pushback. So I know Consumer Reports was involved from the very beginning in the push for this in New York State. But we've worked with advocates and lobbyists across the country. We're heavily involved now in what's happening in California as well. So it's been a lot of effort on part of legislatures, I guess, and advocates, but you have an awful lot of consumers who are actually coming forward to do this as well. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's an awful lot of repair shops, I'm sorry, repair cafes. So it's kind of a movement where people show up in churches and schools and welcome people to kind of bring their devices in, and they help them repair the devices there.
Now, I'm not sure if you actually know this or if this was planned for, but I'm curious to know, is there going to be any effect to maybe some warranty if you do get it repaired at a non-authorized dealer type of place? Is there anything, in the works about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that we're going to have to reevaluate a little bit. We generally don't recommend that people get the extended warranty, and that's because we have survey results from consumers every year that tell us how often they have to take their smartphones, for example, or laptops in for repairs and what they pay for those repairs. And we've generally seen that it's not worth paying for that extended warranty. But when you're talking about a phone these days, uh, because they're waterproof, because they have glass in the front and the back to help them charge, those repairs can often get to replace a screen. It can cost you $500, $600. And so in instances like that, it makes sense sometimes to kind of get Apple Care or Samsung Care. Um, but we'll have to kind of see whether those repairs remain at $500 or $600 now, right? It's possible that they're going to come down. I would expect they don't go down a huge amount because I think the parts are still going to cost money, right? Those screens still cost a few $100s.
Right.
But we may see a drop in prices, and it may not be as necessary then to kind of get that extended warranty.
Well, thank you so much. Before you go, can you just let people know once again when the law will go into effect and when can people, expect to receive these types of repairs in local shops?
That's right. It goes into effect officially on December 28th. I'm not sure whether you'll see shops open for business on December 28th or 29th, but I do think you'll see those repair manuals online, and it won't take long for those parts to kind of make their way into those shops.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Now, if you would like to learn more information about Consumer Reports, please go to their website at www.cr.org or follow them on social media at Consumer Reports. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open after this. Welcome back. The independent nonprofit and feminist publication, The Conversationalist, aims to foster global perspectives and support journalists from different backgrounds. While we learn more about the publication, we understand how the leaders at The Conversationalist stick to their values on the page and in person. Executive Director for The Conversationalist, Elyssa Dole, joins me to discuss. Elyssa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the publication, The Conversationalist?
Sure. We are a nonprofit, independent journalism publication that is dedicated to telling the stories of how people and communities are affected by policy from a global and intersectional feminist point of view.
Now, what sparked, the interest or your interest in joining a platform, that centers feminist stories that range from personal and political?
Mm-hmm. So I have a pretty non-traditional and non-linear background. I'm a community builder, a program designer. I'm a former professional ballet dancer. I've been in business consulting. And in my former work, before The Conversationalist, I was working at an organization called Nation Swell, where we brought together leaders across sectors to discuss social issues. So I had this opportunity to facilitate and be side by side with nonprofit leaders working across a lot of different issues. And they were my heroes. I would watch them, I'd listen to them, I'd think about, what their challenges are. They would tell me. And I think part of me, in my own shy way, wanted to be one of them and to try what does it mean to lead today, and that word leadership can be so fraught. And I was always interested in power dynamic and the ethics of organizations and the human experience of people working within organizations and groups. So when Anna Lynn Guzik, the founder of The Conversationalist, asked me to try my hand at the executive director role, I thought it was a huge gift to see if I could make a difference.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit more. I want to know, a core value for The Conversationalist is to give a voice to marginalized communities across the globe. Now, what does this commitment look like for a publication/journalist outlet? And, how do you ensure that, you kind of stick to that core value?
Mm-hmm. So just we believe in independent media and independent media as a means toward building a more informed democracy. We are a nonprofit because we don't want to be pressured or swayed by certain business agendas, certain revenue pressures that other media companies may have. And Anna Lynn Guzik, who founded us in the wake of the 2016 election, we know that there are journalists all over the world who want to be telling the stories in between the stories, not just the headline, but what is the experience of communities today across issues, across identities, and what does that deep dive really look like? And people want to be reading those stories and filling in the gaps in what they're reading in more traditional media.
Now, a goal of The Conversationalist is to mirror these values in the workplace as well. Could you just talk about or highlight how marginalized communities traditionally face hostile or uncomfortable work environments, and how your organization kind of works to kind of step away from that?
So The Conversationalist has had the benefit of being a young, new organization who is trying to do things differently. And I think about my own experiences as an employee, what I would have wanted to see different. I think about ideas of power, of influence, of transparency. When we talk about the fact that we all have different experiences that we're bringing into the workplace, we want to create systems that where people can really have ownership of the work that they do, and feel like they have a voice and can shape the outcome. And I think a lot about that in building the Conversationalist. We also do a few really concrete things on a very fundamental level. I was coming into an organization that had a global team because we publish global perspective. So it made sense that our team was around the world. We have colleagues in Japan. We have a colleague in Kenya. So we're working across time zones. We require everyone to work in the same time zone for 4 hours a day. That's quite progressive. Otherwise, you're kind of like, you can work how you'd like. We are fully remote, and that is intentional because we believe that is an equitable place to start, and then think about collaboration and how we come together in creative ways from there. Just a few ways that we think about inclusivity and building toward a future that's different.
Now, speaking of inclusivity and kind of just exploring topics regarding to, just racial injustice, gender identity and gender equity, and so much more, how do you, basically what challenges arise when you bring these topics, to the public forum, and how do you kind of ensure that people are having the conversation, but it's still in a safe space, or in an area where these identities are respected? Because as we know, like sometimes when you bring something to the public, kind of a lot of people kind of want to put their voice out there, and sometimes it's not always the most positive, especially for so many marginalized communities. So can you just talk about how your organization kind of, combats that?
So I think about the fact that we were born out of a sense of not wanting to contribute to the harm that narrative can cause. This isn't media trying to pick a side. We are trying to tell the human story and also give space to the writer. We are looking to the writer to tell us what they want, our editor helps shape this voice. But it's not about giving someone an assignment to a particular goal. It's about letting what the writer want to say really emerge in the best way possible, and knowing that we're interested in analysis, we're interested in facts. We recently had an article that focused on the Middle East, which is going on right now, and it wasn't about who's right and who's wrong. It was about where is human suffering? How do we put analysis on that? How does this compare to other countries? Not just what's going on in the Middle East, but what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. What is authoritarianism in this situation? A lot of ideas can be explored. So when you explore ideas in a really inclusive and holistic way, I think it's more likely that you can bridge divide and bring people together in a conversation, spark a conversation, as opposed to trying to shut down conversation.
Now, I want to learn a little bit more about your background. Can you just talk about what your experience is like navigating bias as a woman with an executive title?
So, I really come at this from a very different place than the norm, but I'm very passionate and interested in building spaces where people can grow, thrive, and have ownership. I was a ballet dancer who was applying to business school in my 30s. I had no background in business at the time, but I desperately wanted that education and that opportunity. And when I got to school, I was at NYU, and I was so lucky. I felt so lucky to be there. I was a non-traditional student, and they told me, don't worry, like 97% of the class will graduate with a job, which was very important to me. Well, it ended up that I was one of those 3%. I realized that my background as a ballet dancer, which I was very proud of, something I had done for most of my life, it wasn't always landing well in my interviews in corporate America. I was coming from a profession that was very feminized, that we use our body. To me, I had met some of the most exciting, extraordinary, and intelligent people through that world. And here I realized it was all being reduced to something that that wasn't how I saw the field. So I think about my experience trying to break in to a new field, and then thinking about, if it was so hard for me, how hard is it for other people with all the privilege that I had? And how do I make sure that it's an easier path, that people have a pathway to opportunity, that we think about transferable skills. I think about longevity in career. People don't have linear careers anymore.
Right.
People want to try new things, reinvent themselves, access opportunity for themselves, for their family. And we want to enable this, not prevent it.
Now, could you quickly just let everybody know how they can join the conversation in the community that is a conversationalist? And I think that it's amazing that you're here talking with us and people can kind of see your experience and you kind of understand what's happening. So how can people actually join this community?
Sure. Well, come visit us online. Go to conversationalist.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Sign up, follow us on social media. We host events. We'll be hosting conversation, and we would love to see people there with us. We're growing, we're building, and yeah, we are looking for more audience.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and kind of sharing a little bit about your experience in this amazing publication. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To learn more about this magazine, please go to their website at www.conversationalist.org, or you can follow them on social media at convo_ist. Don't go anywhere. We have more open right after this.
Years of BronxNet, 4 years of Modern Odyssey, broadcasting stories that may inspire you, untold or underreported stories. BronxNet, your story is heard. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching Modern Odyssey on BronxNet.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at this segment with the CEO of the West Side Campaign Against Hunger, Greg Silverman, as he highlights the daunting process of applying for food stamps and cash benefits in New York City. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the West Side Campaign Against Hunger's mission and the communities that it serves?
Yeah, the West Side Campaign Against Hunger has been around about 44 years. It's a food pantry distributing food. Our focus is to make sure all New Yorkers have access with dignity to a choice of healthy food and supportive services. We service customers from all 5 boroughs, about 75,000 customers each and every year.
Now, can you just explain what motivated the founding of the organization in 1979? So as you mentioned, it's been a very long time.
Yeah. Like many food pantries and anti-hunger organizations in New York City, the 70s were, in New York, were a really rough time. And a lot of anti-hunger organizations started at that time period because they saw the need all over the city for food. And so a lot of religious institutions, community groups came together on the Upper West Side and started distributing food in the basement of a church on 86th Street, which is where we've been based for that entire time.
Now, how has the mission evolved over the years, or has it stayed true to like its core mission?
I mean, WSCAH, like most organizations, evolves over time. WSCAH is affectionately named for West Side Campaigning Against Hunger. Most pantries demand that customers come to get food at a pantry. It seems sort of obvious in some ways, but we've tried to really flip that model, right? Why would you make people come to food when you can bring the food to people? We want to make sure our customers have access to the food in the way they want it. And so we've been focused over time to really elevate the amount of fresh produce as well. We give out about over 2 million pounds of fresh produce this year. So we're super focused on making healthy options for people.
So can you actually expand on that? So you actually go to like, do you go to people's homes, or how does that work?
Well, we're really trying to mimic the market, right? So we have community partners where we distribute with. So you don't need to be a pantry to do great work in your community. So whether it's a church, a senior center, a workforce development group, we can distribute with them great food to their network. We can have hubs where people can pick up their food. We can deliver food to people's homes. We do a lot with New York Presbyterian, giving food to moms with young kids and seniors who might not have the ability to get to one of these locations. So we think there's lots of tools and tactics out there, just like lots of people use to get their groceries and their healthy food.
And also what stands out to me is that like comfort and like where people feel safe seems to be like kind of at the core of this, because going to a church where people already go to, there's this sense of security. And I know that unfortunately there is a stigma associated with like going to a building that just may like give out food, especially if people aren't familiar with that. So I think it's amazing that you're partnering with these community organizations that people already trust and feel comfortable with. So I think that's pretty amazing, and I think that like any organization that kind of does this work should be working with the community, because those are the people, those are the places that people trust the most. So now, could you tell us a little bit more about the organization's continuing efforts to provide the community with healthy food options, particularly through the Roundtable Initiative?
Yeah, so my background's as a chef and restaurant owner, so I'm very much used to, all I want is my customers to have the best food possible. That just happens that now I don't charge my customers, which is much better situation. But I also know that in the wholesale world of getting food, oftentimes pricing is an issue. So what West Side Campaigning Against Hunger did is we reached out to now 7 other organizations across the city and started to pool our purchase power. So Met Council, who works across the city, New York Common Pantry, Part of the Solution in the Bronx, and others, we all came together and said, like, let's buy different products together so we get a better price, so we save money, and so that we can drive that money back to serve more people healthy food. So we just realized we're mission focused, all these organizations. So it's just making sure everyone gets the food they need.
Now, here's where, I'm assuming a lot of the concern comes in. Processing rates for SNAP and HRA benefits have dropped considerably in comparison with previous years. Can you elaborate more on this problem and, how it reflects, or what it reflects about the city's priorities?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the true issue is, right? Pantries do a great job of distributing food, but many of us as well do benefits enrollment, because just giving someone the food doesn't really help lift people up out of long-term food insecurity. So our staff, we have a whole team that signs people up for SNAP and re-enrolls people in SNAP. Now, once we do that work, we're trusted partners of our customers and sign them up and send in the information to the city. The processing rates are abysmal, right? They're nowhere, they're not at the level they're supposed to be. And so our customers are waiting months to get their SNAP approvals. And as well, so therefore our customers are not getting the access to the cash they need to spend to buy more groceries, which means our customers need more food from pantries like the West Side Campaigning Against Hunger.
So it kind of like is creating almost like a cycle, right? Would you say?
It's an anti-virtuous cycle,
right?
And in truth, what you're also doing is slowing down the economy, right? Because this is federal dollars that will be spent locally. And so when we stop that process, we're slowing up grocers and bodegas and other shops from getting money in the door that'll help their businesses go. Like we want to keep the economy pushing and make sure our customers get the food they need. And so when we stop processing the applications or slow up the processing time, we're really putting a wrench in the works of feeding New Yorkers in need.
Now, as we also mentioned that it's important to note that the holidays, are upon us, and food and meals, are a huge part of that. How will the process or this like very like daunting process affect so many families who are going to be, expecting to kind of share meals with their other family members?
Yeah, I mean, we know every year the most stressful time of the year for most people, whether they're in food insecure or not, is this holiday season. It should be the most joyous time, but you combine questions of food insecurity, you have the migrant crisis, you have inflation, and you have the inability to get your SNAP benefits on time. You're just constricting people's dollars. Your kids I have small kids. I know my kids are going to want toys for the holidays. You're going to want to spend those dollars for certain things for your family. And therefore, when the SNAP money doesn't show up, you're going to have to make more choices. And you're not going to have that great family experience at the holidays. And so that's what we spend a lot of time on, making sure, doubling down. And, we're going to make sure over 13,000 families get turkeys or pork shoulder or gift cards for vegetarian options, because the city and the state and the federal government are not stepping up to fill the need.
Now, only 40% of SNAP applications were processed in a timely manner. How has this impacted your organization, or how will this, especially, with the holidays coming up, how do you see it impacting your organization?
I mean, firstly, yeah, it's important for the organization, but first and foremost is always the customers, right? It's going to impact our customers. 75,000 Westside Campaign Against Hunger customers are affected when benefits don't come in on time. For organizations like Westside Campaign Against Hunger and many others, we're going to end up having to spend more money on food because we have to fill in the gap where the public sector is failing. So we're spending more money, which means the charity sector is filling in a need that should be taken care of by our combined city, state, and federal governments.
Now, what steps have the Westside Campaign Against Hunger taken to adapt and continue to serve communities in the face of prolonged processing times?
I mean, for us, we spend, like I said, more dollars, right? We probably are going to spend 50% more money this year on purchased food, especially purchased fresh produce. Costs are really high, but at the same time, we're not going to let our community go hungry. So we advocate and spend time with city council and talking to elected officials at a federal level as well to try to push things related to SNAP expansion and at the federal level and increase speeding up processing times. But we're not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel as of yet.
That kind of leads into my next question. What steps do you believe New York City should take to ensure timely access to SNAP and HR benefits, are kind of in the works?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me maybe from my perch. I mean, I know in my own work, we consider like a budget as a moral document. And so where you put your money says a lot about what you believe in. And so if we're not willing to put city dollars to making sure hungry New Yorkers get fed, that's problematic. And I think we need to spend the money to make sure HRA is staffed up with the resources they need to process the applications. It's not that complex.
Now, I also want to bring up the fact that we can't ignore that COVID probably had a significant impact on why so many people did rely on, food pantry and, benefits like that. Can you just talk about maybe what you saw prior to COVID and then, how the need kind of increased after or during?
Well, right. Hunger existed and food insecurity existed and before the pandemic for sure. And in the pandemic, it became even more intense due to the changing nature of jobs and illness and death and so much stresses for families. At the same time, a federal safety net was created or was expanded during COVID that actually decreased food insecurity. We actually built a safety net that worked. And then when we decided, I guess as a country, that the pandemic was technically over, we cut that safety net back. And so, shocking, the numbers of people on food insecure who are food insecure has been rising astronomically. We are twice as busy as we were during the height of the pandemic, which was supposedly the busiest time for hunger in recent memory.
Now, how can the public and policymakers support nonprofits like WSCAH in their mission to combat hunger and food insecurity in New York City?
Yeah, I think people who live in New York City need to reach out to their elected officials at a city level, at a state level, your city council, state assembly, state senators, federal, and reach out to their local offices and say, there's a problem here. My neighbors are going hungry, and we need to push HRA for one to be fund, or push the city to fund HRA properly, make sure we're expanding the Community Food Connections program, which will send more food to pantries across the city. And at the same time, we need to ask our elected officials to step up and demand that a budget actually reflects the needs of the community. We're going to go into budget cycle in January again, right? And we start talking about that, and it'll be the time for our elected officials to stand up and say, we need to fully fund HRA. We need to expand Community Food Connections program to get more healthy product to pantries. And we need to give frontline organizations the tools to do their work.
Well, I appreciate you coming here and kind of talking about this, because we see, these organizations in our communities, serving our communities, but people don't often think about, the strain that what's going on behind the scenes and how it's affecting those communities that are helping us. So I appreciate you, taking the time to come down here and talk to us about this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
To learn more about Greg and his organization efforts to fight against hunger, please go to their website at www.WSCAH.org. We'd like to thank Greg again for joining us on the show. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Open right after this. Welcome back. As I Eat the World is a play that follows a Latin man who goes on a journey navigating forced masculinity and challenges with mental health while confronting the realities of living with an eating disorder. Playwright and performer Luis Roberto Herrera joins me to discuss As I Eat the World. Luis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, how did your journey as playwright and performer with As I Eat the World begin?
I mean, it started about a year ago. A friend of mine named Frankie Gonzalez, he wrote his own one-person show called Heart Stop, which is about his struggles with weight, and that gave me the courage to talk about my own struggles with weight, eating disorders, and mental health. And no one was producing my work, so I decided I'm going to just do it myself and write my own story.
Now, I want to talk about, you mentioned that it's like a one-person, type of thing. That sounds very intimidating, and then plus also the subject matter, you're really putting yourself out there. Can you just talk about that experience and, how in any way is that therapeutic for you, or is it at all?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a one-person show. I'm on stage for an hour and 20 minutes just by myself. And it's challenging having to talk to the audience and also to myself for that long, and therapeutic. At first, it was hard for me to perform this kind of thing, and as I've been doing it again and again, it's getting easier, and I find it to be not only helpful for me, but therapeutic for those that come and see it.
Now, can you talk about the significance of presenting the show at the Tank?
For sure. This is the first full production that the show is getting. It's having a 3-week run, And it being on this kind of public scale gives more people the opportunity to experience the story and to kind of see something that is, for all intents and purposes, invisible to the public eye.
Now, as I mentioned, the play follows a Latin man as he struggles with forced masculinity, which is a major theme within the play. Can you expand on more themes of forced masculinity?
For sure, forced masculinity, that is such a interesting thing, right? Especially within POC culture, or just Latina culture specifically, because we are raised where men are supposed to be what is considered men, right? We have to be the ones that take care of everyone. We have to be the ones that provide. We have to be manly. We have to be gruff. We have to be, intense and physical. But that's not all that men can be, right? Men can be feminine. Men can be soft. Men can be delicate. Men can be gentle. And this forced masculinity within the Latina culture sometimes goes against it. And this show is about how that kind of struggle between the two, what that can do to someone's psyche.
Now, as you mentioned, it's pretty much a global challenge for so many people across the world and across different cultures. So although, the spotlight is on the Latin experience, could you talk about maybe ways that other, men from different communities could also relate to that experience?
For sure, because it's such a normal thing in a lot of society today, I think people will just recognize how they have been forced to be what is considered a man within their own household, within their own communities, and recognize that maybe that isn't the only way. Maybe if they had done something different, then they themselves would be who they really wanted to be, or be who they really should have been, in whatever way that means. And I think I just tackle it from the Latina perspective because that's what I know, right? But I think people will be able to resonate with it because it is such a universal problem.
Right, and it could also be a moment for reflection of people watching and how, see how, it mirrors in their own communities. So, I think that's pretty amazing. Now, the main character of the play struggles with mental health and wellness. What were some of the challenges of translating that to the stage? And as you mentioned, you're doing it by yourself, so it's not like, maybe you have other characters that could highlight that. So, what were some of the challenges of kind of like portraying that on stage?
For sure, because I myself, it's semi-autobiographical, and portraying these kind of things on the stage, I think the challenge was, how do I talk about them without seeming like I'm just reading a textbook or like I'm just giving a lesson? And the way that I've decided to do that is by telling stories from this character's past and how they've gotten to this point, and experiences in their upbringing all the way up into the point of where the play takes place.
Now, director Scout Davis assisted with the telling of this story. Could you talk about your experience working with them?
Yeah, of course. Scout Davis, the play wouldn't exist without Scout. I approached them with the idea and the title, and it was a weird idea, and it was a interesting title, and they immediately said, yes, let's do it. And they've been so generous and giving when it comes to ideas. When I've come to them, they've either have been honest with me and told me that works, but what if we did this instead? And they've just been constantly with me since the beginning when I first wrote this in December of last year.
Now, you talked about, which I think is hard for a lot of creatives, like when someone says, maybe we should do this.
Yeah.
How did you face that, especially with a story so personal?
Yeah, I mean, because while it is a personal story, it is still, stories need to not only be sometimes kind of enlightening, but they also need to be somewhat entertaining, because you want to keep someone's attention. So that's how I approached it. Anytime someone would give me advice, or whenever Scout would suggest something differently, I knew that the place that they were coming from was a place of, to make this better, to make the story better, to make people want to listen more. And that's how I went about being okay with people telling me what would work better for your own personal story.
Now, how has Scout's background as a non-binary queer person influenced some of the themes in the play?
Now, I don't want to speak for Scout and their experience, but I know that they themselves have struggled with certain things within their life, whether it be being the masculinity issue or eating disorders or things like that, they themselves have brought that perspective into it, which has only made us kind of mesh in a much better way, and they've been able to understand things that I'm going through, and that's how they've been able to communicate with me so easily throughout the process of writing and rewriting and performing and finally the production.
Now, what I think that is also, like, even as I'm listening to it now, that, you know, regardless of your gender or identity, so many people can relate, you know, to like some of the challenges that the main character is going through. I also want to highlight, you know, that the main character confronts eating disorders, which is something that's not not often explored in regard to, you know, by and for men. So can you just talk about that experience, kind of like bringing that to the forefront?
For sure. Eating disorders are, you know, more often than not shown as a thing that only women suffer through, or women are maybe non-binary, but more men than people realize deal with eating disorders. Maybe they themselves don't even recognize that it is an eating disorder. And I myself have been suffering through one for as long as I can remember, since the 7th grade. And I knew that bringing this to light would help those that don't even know, those that do know and are afraid to talk about it. But as you said, this is for anyone of any gender, anyone of any race, right? People that aren't sure if they know how to talk about it, or if they can talk about it, or if anyone else has experienced what they have experienced. And this story is for them. It's like, no, you're not alone. No one is alone. You have someone and other people who have experienced the same thing.
Now, do you possibly hope, or, you know, could this be kind of like laying the groundwork for, you know, as a way to normalize that this is something that happens in a lot of communities, you know, with people who identify as male?
I would like to hope so. I've had a lot of people, because I've performed this at a few fringe festivals around the country, and I've had people come up to me, men come up to me, letting me know that they felt connected, that they have never thought about it in the way that it was presented, and that they've never seen a story like this told out loud. They've only heard about it like in whispers or in like groups. So I am hoping that it will shine a light, and that it will make something that is invisible visible.
Now, how did this particular theme also influence the creation of As I Eat the World?
It influenced it because, you know, I am always trying to look for stories to tell that maybe people don't know too much about. And I think the point of theater and the point of this piece is to educate, but also entertain, right? Because I feel like we can learn something from everything. And I think this play itself is, in a weird way, educational while still being entertaining. It's funny, there's dancing, there's music, there's humor, but then there's also something really profound to discover a journey that is this real.
And also, I mean, I like that you kind of talked about how, you know, things are funny, and because not everyone's experience with something traumatic is at every point, you know, like they're feeling sad. There sometimes are moments where, you know, you may laugh, or sometimes laughing is how people, you know, go through a lot of tough situations. So can you talk about the importance of kind of like also having moments like that in the play?
For sure, yeah. You know, I mean, life is beautiful and also terrifying at the same time, right? And no matter what life experiences we have, tough or amazing, there are different moments for each. And this kind of journey, this play, we found it important that if we want to talk about something so serious, we need to also shine light on the good things, right? The funny moments, the beautiful moments, the weird moments, right? And all those will make people feel connected and make them feel like, oh, this is something I can listen to, and it won't just make me super duper sad.
Right, because I think if you go into something, sometimes it can make you a little bit closed off. You're like, you don't want to feel the emotion if you know that's exactly what you're getting into. So I think kind of having that as like, you know, a creative standpoint kind of like lets people open, and kind of like brings down that wall so that they can be vulnerable when the time comes for them to be vulnerable. So I think that's pretty amazing. Now, what do you hope audiences, especially those from your community, gain from interacting with As I Eat the World?
I hope that they walk away knowing that they're not alone. I hope they walk away with the idea that maybe they can talk about their issues a little more, that if they talk about their issues, maybe certain things can be prevented moving forward in their lives. And also maybe it'll help them recognize other people in their own lives that are dealing with these things that maybe they had thought was just a weird thing.
Well, Luis, I want to thank you so much for joining me and having this really interesting and just like, I don't know, just I think it was a really interesting and great conversation to have about so many topics that we don't get to talk about often. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, remember, As I Eat the World will be available to watch at the Tank until December 17th at 312W and 36th Street. You can find out more about ticket information at www.thetanknyc.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.